In this episode of Zoomer Life,
you will live longer, potentially, if you engage in physical and mental activity. And even if you don't, your quality of life will be better.
Zoomer Life, health, wellness, and longevity from the world's brightest minds.
Zachary Levine, come on up here, Zach. I know he looks like a baby, but if you have a look at his biog, page 16, you'll see he's got quite a CV that he's managed to be built up. But in the interest of full disclosure, I need to tell you that Zachary Levine is also my godson. Yes, his father, my great good pal, Dr. Saul Levine, was the head of psychiatry at Sick Kids, and it looked for a while as if Zachary was going to follow in his father's footsteps. So I protested. I said, holy cow, Zachary, the chances of my flipping my lid, probably very small, but the chances of my dying of something horrible, intro, gastro, whatever, are probably greater, so how about you become like a real doctor? I offered him a bribe, helped him a little with his transport issues, and here he is, the head of emergency services at a major hospital in Montreal.
So run for your life. The point of this talk is going to be to explain to you. I'm sure you all know that it's important to stay active, but maybe you don't know how important it is, and maybe you don't know how important it is to be mentally active as well as physically. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. And I have a lot to cover, so I'll try and go quickly so I don't miss anything. I'm an emergency doctor most of the time, and I do a lot of teaching. And I also go up north. Every couple of months, I go for a week to a small village in the north of Quebec, either a Cree village or an Inuit village. This is a village that I was at two weeks ago, actually. This is called Ujebugmu. One of the things I have noticed working up north, and I especially noticed this last time, is that some of the healthiest people in the community, and we all know that there are a lot of health problems in the native population. That's a given. However, some of the healthiest people in the community are the older generation. Now, I want to mention one thing first. First of all, when they refer to the older generation there, they call them elders. And I think that's important because when they say elders, that's a term of respect and deference. They say, these are the elders, and, well, these people merit it. But it's also something that you don't see often enough in our society. Now, one of the things that I've noticed about the elders that makes them healthier is they spend as much time as possible in what they call the bush. Basically, they have cabins where they live the old way. They hunt for their food, they chop their own wood, and they stay healthy, they stay physically active just by surviving. And so that's a great way to do it. And in order to be physically active, you don't have to run on the treadmill, you don't have to cycle, but you can do things around the house. You can integrate activity into your daily life. You can walk to the store instead of driving there. You can take the stairs if you're able to. Something I do sometimes to try and stay in shape is I jog, and often up north, there's no one else who jogs, and they often look at me like I'm a bit crazy. And oftentimes I get the impression that I think they actually are looking behind me, like, what are you running from? I'm not running from anything. Except 2 months ago, I actually found out what I was running from, if I can bring it up. One of these. So I actually bumped into one of these during my run. I didn't bump into it, luckily. It was a few hundred yards up, and fortunately, I don't think it saw me. So this is, of course, a black bear, beautiful creature. And I, of course, being the brave man that I am, I turned around and ran away as fast as I could. By far, the vast majority of people who die while they're having sex are men having sex in hotel rooms with partners who are 20 years younger than them and who are not their wives. And often they're inebriated. So that's a lot of stress on the heart, right?
Get the latest Zoomer Life news, presenter information, and watch streaming video at www.zoomerlifeconference.ca. Zoomer Life. Health, wellness, and longevity from the world's brightest minds.
The third thing that I do professionally is that I've been involved, luckily, with Zoomer Media over the past few years. So I call into Gold Hawk's radio show on Zoomer Radio, and I try and answer questions as best as I can. And I also write for Zoomer Magazine, but on the internet, it's difficult because, there's so much out there, and really what people want is a title that will grab your attention. So this is one of the titles that I saw on the internet, the 4 miracle foods that will make you healthy and beautiful. It doesn't lend itself to an honest medical discussion. Having said that, today what I'm presenting you with is the best weapon you have to improve your chances at living longer and improve your quality of life, and that is to stay engaged and stay active physically and mentally. So what are the benefits? I'll go through them quickly. I'm sure you all know the cardiovascular benefits of physical activity. So cardiovascular, that means it decreases your blood pressure, it decreases your cholesterol, it decreases your blood sugar if you're diabetic, decreases your risk of stroke and heart attack, which are the biggest killers in the Western world. Mental health, very big benefits. So there's no medication that is more effective than being physically active to treat anxiety and depression. In addition, being physically active has been shown to decrease your risk of developing dementia, and if you do have dementia, the progression is slower. Cancer, there's very good evidence that the risk of colorectal cancer and breast cancer is lowered in people who are physically active, and there is evidence, not as strong, but there is evidence for other cancers, including breast cancer, and prostate cancer, and also uterine cancer and endometrial cancer. And finally, longevity. There are good studies showing that the more physically active you are, the longer your average lifespan. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this rule, and there are very healthy people who die young who are very physically active, but this is in general. And when I was doing some reading for this, I came across a good quote from Woody Allen about longevity. "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work, I want to achieve it through not dying." But even more importantly is having a good quality of life, right? If you live a long time but you're not able to enjoy the things that you love, your family, your hobbies, then it's almost not worth it. So the question is, so what kind of exercise? This person this person's getting out of the house, but they don't quite get it in terms of physical activity. You do have to move outside, but it should be your own effort. So what kind of exercise? So the Canadian and the American guidelines for physical activity recommend 150 minutes a week of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So basically, the way that scientists measure physical activity and exertion in terms of METs. So 1 MET is the amount of energy expended by you all right now. Sitting quietly, you're expending about 1 MET of energy. And moderate physical activity is 3 to 6 METs. So that would be things like brisk walking, like leisurely cycling, like swimming, but for fun, not doing laps. It also includes other things like doing some forms of gardening. Certainly raking the leaves qualifies. And then you get to vigorous physical activity, which is over 6 METs. And over 6 METs is things like jogging, things like swimming laps, things like shoveling heavy snow. If you're mild shoveling is certainly good exercise, but it's not necessarily vigorous. It's considered moderate. And you don't have to do vigorous exercise. Moderate is considered good too. I always remember about 20 years ago now, I was in medical school, and we went over METs and how many METs for different activities. And one of the things they talked about is sex. How many METs does sex qualify for? So just out of interest, sexual intercourse is about 2 to 3 METs. It is an extra MET if it's illicit. And in fact, they've actually studied who dies during sex, who are the people who pass away. And in general, by far the vast majority of people who die while they're having sex are men having sex in hotel rooms with partners who are 20 years younger than them and who are not their wives. And often they're inebriated. So that's a lot of stress on the heart, right? Do what you enjoy, right? You can't push yourself to do something that you hate every single day. And ideally, try and find a group of people that you can do it with. and they can encourage you and you can pressure each other to do it. Once you get going, of course, as Sir Isaac Newton said, an object in motion tends to stay in motion, so it certainly builds on itself. So you feel better, you look better, and you tend to start to crave it.
Get the latest Zoomer Life news, presenter information, and watch streaming video at www.zoomerlifeconference.ca. Zoomer Life. Health, wellness, and longevity from the world's brightest minds.
Okay, how do you get going? I don't want to pretend that it's necessarily easy, especially if you're not used to being active. And even me, I tend to put on a good 10 pounds in the winter and lose it in the summer again. It's especially hard in the winter. But there's a few things we can do. One of the things I mentioned before, which is just integrate it into your everyday life. So walk to the store, or do your own lawn mowing. Actually, moderate 3 to 6 METs, that moderate category of physical activity. If you have a lawnmower that is electric, that's considered moderate physical activity. If you have one of those push lawnmowers, then that's considered vigorous physical activity. The other things that you can do to stay active, inertia is very strong, especially when you're sitting inside and it's cold outside. So do what you can. That's one thing. I mean, if you have physical limitations, you respect those, and you can talk to your doctor before you go ahead with any kind of exercise regimen. Do what you enjoy. Right? You can't push yourself to do something that you hate every single day. And ideally, try and find a group of people that you can do it with. And they can encourage you and you can pressure each other to do it. Once you get going, of course, as Sir Isaac Newton said, an object in motion tends to stay in motion, so it certainly builds on itself. So you feel better, you look better, and you tend to start to crave it. I wanted to mention one other thing, which is, what is the basis of this? How does exercise keep us young on a cellular level? Like, what is the basis for this? So these are DNA strands. These are your chromosomes, your genetic blueprint. At the end of every DNA strand, there is what's called a telomere. That's the red on the slide. Telomere is a little cap at the end. And what happens is when cells divide, they replicate the DNA. And every time that a cell divides and that the DNA is replicated, this telomere gets shorter, to the point where once the telomere is very short, the cell either dies or it stops to replicate. So in some sense, this is a measure of the youthfulness of a cell. The longer the telomere, the more young the cell. And what they have found is that in people who are physically active, and there is a dose response, so the more physically active you are, the better. But the most physically active people, their cells have telomeres that are as long as sedentary people 10 years younger than they are. So that's just some cellular basis for this. And I'll mention one other thing. Because sometimes people say, well, there's dangers. People die. Last month there was a marathon in Montreal, and someone passed away during it, a young person. So I saw on the internet someone wrote, when are they going to stop these needless death races? Which is a bit extreme. But basically, anytime you exert yourself, it's more stress on the heart, and people they can get angina, they can get more ischemia, which means the heart is not getting enough blood. But over the long term, of course, your body learns, your heart becomes more efficient, and you do extend your lifespan. And there was a very good quote. So someone did a study, Dr. Rettelmeyer here in Toronto did a study about it, and he found that your risk of dying, he looked at millions of people running marathons, and your risk of dying during a marathon is no higher than your average middle-aged person dying at any point. And he had a very good quote, which I will borrow. If you want to be sure of living for the next 5 minutes, then stay on the couch. But if you want to be sure of living for another 15 years, you might want to get up and get some physical activity. And one of the interesting things is people who are socially active have been shown not only to decrease their risk of developing dementia and progressing in dementia, but have actually been shown to have a longer lifespan than people who withdraw and are no longer socially active and socially involved.
Get the latest Zoomer Life news, presenter information, and watch streaming video at www.zoomerlifeconference.ca. Zoomer Life. Health, wellness, and longevity from the world's brightest minds.
the second half to this, and this is just as important as the physical activity part, and that is mental exercise, okay? And that doesn't necessarily mean, it can mean puzzles, it can mean games. If you look on the internet, you'll find thousands of people trying to sell you things that will improve your memory and hopefully stave off dementia. And that they may or may not be useful. But there are better ways to do it. One is, and it was talked about by Dr. Goldman, and it's been talked about by Moses as well, is staying active mentally by either continuing to work or getting involved. You don't have to continue at your same job, but if you do retire, do something that really interests you afterwards that keeps you stimulated mentally. Other ways to stay mentally active. Actually, I'll mention also that it doesn't just delay the onset and progression of dementia. There are certain mental activities that I will talk about that actually increase your longevity, so increase your odds of living longer. So, you all know Margaret Atwood. So one way to stay mentally active is to read and to write. Stay active that way. Another way, this is Dale Goldhawk, whose radio show I call into every couple of weeks and tried to answer questions. And Dale, what Dale does is he stays mentally active by taking a stand on things. He reads the newspapers, he has an opinion, he argues, he discusses things. You stay involved, you stay engaged, you don't disengage. This is a beautiful town, or village, I should say, right at the top of Quebec called Salouet. And I want to mention one other thing that the native populations are very good at, and that is they stick together socially. Their family unit is very strong. And one of the interesting things is people who are socially active have been shown not only to decrease their risk of developing dementia and progressing in dementia, but have actually been shown to have a longer lifespan than people who withdraw and are no longer socially active and socially involved. And finally, another way to stay mentally active, and there are a myriad of ways, find something that you enjoy, that you love, volunteering. You may have heard that people who volunteer live longer than people who do not volunteer. That's true. An interesting study from last month, actually, showed that the reason you volunteer matters. So people who volunteer in order to help other people live significantly longer than people who volunteer because they want to help themselves. So that means if they want to get out of the house, or they're trying to escape a problem, or they're trying to look good in their community, those people don't live as long as people who are volunteering in order to help out others. So it shows that it is actually healthy to think about other people and to step outside yourself. This is my grandmother. She is 100 years old, a couple of months ago, and she's the one on the right, in case you weren't sure. So she's 100 years old. What's her secret? I don't know. She's a bit iconoclastic. She smoked for 40 years, not much of an exerciser. I do know why she has stayed sharp, and it is the Dale Goldhawk phenomenon. My grandmother is a big arguer, and she is a big reader, and she is a big discusser, and she loves crossword puzzles, and her brain was always active, and that is how she has stayed mentally sharp. So in summary, you will live longer, potentially, if you engage in physical and mental activity. And even if you don't, your quality of life will be better. That's it. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Proud of him. What a great. Thanks very much. Great.